Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, Senior Editor at Forbes. Flight delays are expected to mount this week as air traffic controllers miss their first paycheck because of the shutdown. Joining us now to talk about the situation is my colleague, Suzanne Rowan Kelleher. She is a staff writer who covers travel, transportation, and all the most essential information that we need right now. Suzanne, thank you so much for joining us.
It's good to be here.
So you have this story that published yesterday that talks about air traffic controllers will miss their first full paycheck Tuesday, that's today, October 28th, due to the government shutdown. I have so many questions, but starting with, the government has been shut down for a number of weeks. How was it that air traffic controllers were paid up until this point?
So they get paid every 2 weeks, and 2 weeks ago on the 14th, they got a partial paycheck for work that was done before the shutdown started. So there was a lag. They got paid on the 14th for everything worked before October 1st. This is the first paycheck that they're seeing a zero paycheck.
And what are we seeing at airports? You reported on delays at certain airports around the country. Can you take us through some of the most major airports and what we know about flight delays right now?
So, what's happened? Okay, so just sort of if we back up and we kind of give a little grace to air traffic controllers, even before the shutdown, I think we've discussed this. There's been a shortage of air traffic controllers. They have been working 10-hour days, 6 days a week, with 4 days off every month. And that was before the shutdown, and now they're not getting paid. So I've been talking to quite a few air traffic controllers. They are stretched thin. This is a very fatigued workforce already, and now you've got this stress on top of it. So what happened in the last shutdown in 2018-19, we're starting to see happen again, where air traffic controllers, and this happened also with TSA workers who missed their first paycheck last Friday. They hitting that first paycheck is a big gut punch, and they start doing a lot of soul searching. I've heard from air traffic controllers who are driving Uber and for DoorDash on their 4 days off. They're calling in sick to grab an extra shift on Uber because they can't pay their mortgage or their childcare or whatever. I've heard from air traffic controllers who told me that they went into debt the last shutdown because even though they get back pay when the shutdown ends, it comes in one of those lovely lumps that gets taxed at a higher rate, and they get made whole. It gets sorted out when they file their taxes next April. But in that meantime, they're short. And so there's a lot of stress. So we do see that air traffic controllers are, FAA has been putting up what they call staffing triggers, which is when there's an insufficient personnel level at a facility, they put out a staffing trigger, and that sometimes they can mitigate and just kind of work around it, and sometimes it leads to ground delays, ground stops, and other types of mechanisms to slow traffic down, and that causes delays.
So essentially, and I do have this statement from Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy that you referenced, we have more people calling in sick, more people not showing up for work. He said this on Sunday Morning Futures. And so when you have people calling in sick, a certain number of air traffic controllers can be out and operations can continue as normal, but eventually it gets to the point that ground stops happen. What else happens when too many air traffic controllers
Well,
don't show up
before,
for work?
yeah, before a ground stop, there would be something called a ground delay. And basically, that is where they don't stop traffic completely in and out of an airport, but they slow it way down. And they slow it down so that they can manage it. So it's, air traffic controllers, their job is to sequence flights so that everybody, all the planes get in that orderly line that we know when we're in a plane or either taking off or landing. They want to keep distance between planes. That's the biggest thing. So they have to know where everything is. And if there aren't enough controllers, they need to mitigate and slow traffic down. That causes delays. A ground delay, what that does, say, let's just say there's a ground delay in Newark, it means that planes coming into Newark are delayed. So what they'll do is they'll hold your plane, say you're flying from Charlotte, they'll hold the plane in Charlotte, and then it might be an hour, it might be 2 hours, however long it is. My husband had a colleague flying from Texas to New York over the weekend, and it became what should have been like a 2 hour trip. It was like a 9 hour day, stuck in airports, and that we're going to see some of that in the next, if the shutdown keeps going, we're going to see more of that.
What do your sources say about the continuation of the shutdown? Are you having anyone telling you that this air traffic control issue, which is crucial for American transportation, is that putting any pressure on the government to get back to work?
That's what basically broke the shutdown in 2018, 2019. There was a day when 10 air traffic controllers called in. There were a number of airports along the eastern seaboard that basically came to ground stops, and Congress suddenly, or President Trump during his first term suddenly, kind of had a come to Jesus moment and ended the shutdown. I don't hear anybody saying that now. In fact, I think I read something this morning where the Republicans that had been floating this idea of paying some federal workers, including air traffic controllers, are now walking that back. So it does not feel like we're getting closer to a resolution of the shutdown. But what will happen is that the air traffic controllers are going to get more and more stressed out and more fatigued, and you're going to see a lot more sick calls. I think that people have to realize that these sick calls, I mean, they can be for legitimate reasons. Like one air traffic controller told me that his kid was sick, and he's like, I cannot afford babysitting right now because I don't have a paycheck. So what is he going to do? Leave his 7-year-old home by himself? Like I think we're putting people in these situations where, for legitimate reasons, people talk about, the illegitimate reasons people will call in sick. But what I'm hearing from air traffic controllers that I talk to is that people, they want to be at work, but they have life, they have things going on, and they need to take some time. So I think, we're just going to see more sick calls.
And then you mentioned that TSA agents went without their first paycheck on Friday. And before we started recording, you said you think there might be some confusion or general misunderstanding about the difference between the paychecks going to the TSA versus air traffic controllers. Would you like to clarify that confusion that you've been seeing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people, they understand that both TSA workers and air traffic controllers are both federal workers, but they work for different agencies. So TSA is under Homeland Security, it's a security force, and the air traffic controllers are under the FAA, which is under the Department of Transportation. So what happens when TSA workers call in sick, and they're doing that as well, is that you see longer lines at security, right? So if an airport can't open up a lane or two, every other lane gets longer. We've all been there, right? So that is happening. And then also now we have the air traffic controllers having missed their first full paycheck. And when they call in sick, that's when the flights are actually delayed. If a TSA workers call in sick, it doesn't delay flights, it causes congestion inside the airport. If a bunch of air traffic controllers call in sick, that causes the flight delays. And one thing that I'd like to say, though, that is what I've noticed in the last, certainly since the Sunday, is if you look at the airports that are having the call outs, they're the biggest airports in the country. You had Atlanta yesterday, 800 flights in and out of Atlanta delayed, 800. You have Denver, the fourth busiest airport today. Um, LAX, I think, is number five on Saturday or Sunday. I think they had a ground stop because of staffing. These are the biggest airports that are being affected. Right now, there is a staffing trigger at the Philadelphia Tracon, which is a terminal. There are three types of facilities, but it's the facility that basically oversees Newark Airport, and that Tracon has a staffing trigger right now. So Newark is, I think, the seventh or eighth busiest. So you have a lot of the busiest hubs um, having this happen, and that then there's a knock-on effect, right? The hubs tend to be where a layover happens. So if you're flying from A to B, you're probably actually going to end up at some other airport for a layover. And if that airport has a staffing trigger or a ground delay, guess what? Your whole day now is ruined.
What is your advice to travelers? I guess there are two buckets of travelers: folks who've had long planned trips, booked their flights months, weeks before the shutdown began, before we reached this situation. So you have people who have these tickets and weren't expecting the situation. And then there's the bucket of people who might need to travel in the coming days, haven't booked their tickets yet. Let's start with that first group. For folks with long planned trips, what would you tell them right now?
So, first of all, I get asked all the time, is flying safe? And I would say it is safe because, like I said before, what they do is they just slow everything down. So it's not, the FAA is not going to allow, they'll have a ground stop before they allow an unsafe situation. What travelers are going to find, though, is a lot of hassle. They're going to get to the airport. There's going to be probably longer lines for security. They're going to have to get to the airport sooner in order to just, they're not going to know maybe until they get there. TSA used to have they have an app that you can look up the wait time. Guess what? That's not being monitored during the shutdown, right? So there's very, you could call the airport, I suppose, but and they, watch for alerts from your airline, but it's, prepare for a long spell at the airport. And then, so back to your question, I think if you have your flights booked and I would say, do you have travel insurance? Are you able to maybe, it depends on your level of tolerance of hassle, right? Are you prepared to spend the whole day maybe traveling when you thought it was going to be a 4 hour uh, experience? If you have travel insurance and if you can maybe postpone the trip, maybe personally, that's what I would do. I've been telling people, if it's like an 8 hour drive, why don't you just drive? Because you'll probably get there faster than you would, uh, very possibly if you flew. So, I mean, I think it's just going to be a very awful, hassle-filled experience at airports until this gets resolved.
You answered my second question there. So if you can drive or take other means of transportation, that's your advice to folks who are
It's a
planning trips right
personal,
now.
yeah, it's a personal thing, but I mean, I would much rather be in a car. I know the safety, the track record for safety for air travel is a lot. I get every aviation, expert. Don't call me. I know the stats say that it's much more dangerous to drive, but honestly, I feel better when I'm moving than when I'm just sitting in an airport lounge. So yes, like I would say, start to kind of like think things through. I heard from Hopper yesterday, which is like a flight booking app, that they're seeing a huge uptick in people booking travel insurance, so that they can pull the plug if they need to. And the thing is, we don't know how long this is going to go on. We're already almost at the longest. We're already the second longest shutdown. We're not too far away from being the longest shutdown. I've heard Some politicians say it could go through Thanksgiving. That would be horrendous, like absolutely horrendous for, well, the whole economy, but also just for travelers. The U.S. Travel Association says we're losing, $1 billion a week in tourism revenue, which is basically how they calculate that is what people spend when they're, on vacation or on trips. And people spend money, obviously, when you're away from home. You need a hotel, you eat out at restaurants, all those things. That's not happening as much. So it's a huge issue for the entire economy, and I think I'm hoping that it ends quickly. I've spent a lot of time over the last few weeks speaking with TSA officers and air traffic controllers. I have a lot of sympathy for their predicament because they're not getting a paycheck when the Congress people who put the shutdown on the map, they are getting paid, and the House members aren't even in Congress right now. It is very hard to not see this as an unjust kind of situation.
And your comments there made me bring up a paragraph from one of your stories where Transportation Secretary was talking about the hiring supercharge that he had been talking about earlier in the year. As you noted earlier in this conversation, the ongoing shortage and pressure of and on air traffic controllers has been one of the key storylines in American aviation this year. Do you think that this shutdown will diminish the number of people who apply for these jobs? For folks who were thinking about it and they're watching what's going on, do you think we'll still see them working to become air traffic controllers?
So I do. I think the FAA is afraid of that. I think Sean Duffy, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, said as much when he was on Fox News over the weekend. He said, what happens is there's a pipeline, right? So you have kind of cadets that are in the pipeline. They have to go to the academy at Oklahoma City. Then they get assigned to an air traffic control facility somewhere else in the country. They're being trained. The instructors right now are not being paid. And from what I've heard, I also have talked to a lot of the trainees, the training staff, and they don't feel like they're paid enough anyway, and now they're not being paid. But what happens is that the cadets are they get a stipend, and that's running out in like another week. And even when they start, like air traffic controllers, when they're seasoned, they can make, a good six-figure income. But when they start, they're just like any other entry-level employee, not being paid anywhere near what the experienced top-level people are. And Sean Duffy said, people are going to wash out of the system like that. They've already invested getting them to a certain part in the pipeline. It takes like 3 or 4 years to train an air traffic controller until they're certified. And if partway through that pipeline we're pulling the plug, or they're pulling their own plug because they're like, oh my God, and of course they're talking to people who remember the last shutdown. People have muscle memory, and so hearing their colleagues say, oh my gosh, this is like last time, and I had to sell my car, or I had to, and I think there's a lot of people rethinking their choices. It's just not a good situation at all if you're trying to attract talent. And air traffic controllers, there's a very specific type of person that can be an air traffic controller. I've heard people say it's like a short order cook mentality. Things are flying at you all the time, and you just have to stay calm and keep things moving. One air traffic controller, a very senior guy, told me that it's gamers, right? People who can just kind of have a lot of stuff happening on the screen, and they kind of keep either the calm duck on the surface that just keeps paddling. That is not, that is a lot of people who start the process to become an air traffic controller wash out. They wash out because the FAA washes them out because they don't have the right probably temperament. It's an incredibly stressful job. And to be able to do it for 10 hours at a time and then expect to do it without pay, I think is, is huge, just huge stress on top of an already stressful job.
You took the words out of my mouth. It is an incredibly stressful job, a very important job, and one that has been made 10 times, if not 20 times, harder due to the ongoing government shutdown. Suzanne, we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything else you want the Forbes audience to know about how the shutdown is affecting air traffic controllers and air travel in the United States?
I would just tell people, if you are traveling, definitely get to the airport early, like way earlier than you were planning on it. Um, be prepared for disruption, because it's either going to happen, I think, on the TSA side, where you're having, you're encountering a longer line in the airport, or your flight might be delayed. Fly early in the morning if you possibly can. Even in good times, like on a clear blue sky day, a morning flight is a lot less likely to be disrupted, to be delayed or canceled. Those things tend to, ramp up as the day goes on. So, give yourself the best odds for, having a clean kind of journey. And if you can, if you can, maybe think about delaying your trip until, maybe even a week. Maybe it'll be over by then. I think a lot of people are making those kinds of calculations, and I think it's probably not uh, unwise. I mean, you could be looking at spending half a day or an entire day at an airport.
Suzanne, thank you so much for joining us and giving us this advice. Thank you for your coverage. For folks who want ongoing updates, should they follow you on Forbes? Should they follow you on social? Where should they find you?
Sure, they can follow me at Forbes.
Follow Suzanne at Forbes. Suzanne, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.